themselves as more than one race. So essentially, we could say that in the year 2000, we had the creation of a whole new race, multiracial people or biracial people. Now, have biracial people always existed? Yes, of course. But prior to 2000, you had to pick. Well, let's see. Will I claim mother's side or will I claim father's side? So now in 2000, you don't have to pick. If your parents are in an exogamous relationship, and so they are different racial categories, you no longer have to pick. You can take one of each and check both boxes. You're a whole new race since 2000. Although, just on that point, the idea that anyone is purebred or pure blood, first of all, you cannot tell race by blood. Secondly, we all have a mixture of everything in us. So even though sometimes the census will have on there a category white only, black only, I mean, again, that's just a fiction in and of itself. That's just a social construct. There is no only in at least not in our society. I was going to say in the world, but there probably isn't even in the world. So let's move forward. Oh no, yes, now I know where I was going. I had to pause there for a minute. So technically, if we think about it, how many races are there? Just one, the human race. Just one. Okay, let's move to talk about prejudice and discrimination. Okay, sometimes people get these terms mixed up and they use them, interchangeably, but they actually are distinct. Prejudice is an attitude. It's something that you feel. Discrimination is an action. It's something that you do. Now, you can have a negative attitude towards people and not act on it, okay? Because maybe you own a cafe and you don't like a particular group, but when they come to your cafe, you put on the fake smile and you welcome them. Why? Because you don't want to be sued. And if your cafe is receiving any type of federal money, any type of loan, or has any kind of program that's government sponsored, that's helping them in any kind of way, it is illegal to discriminate. So they put on that face, welcome, come on in, although they really don't want you to come in. But they will not act on their discrimination, possibly because they don't want to risk being sued. And they don't want to risk the bad reputation that they would get if it got out. And then some people, are not prejudiced, but they will act on it. And they will act in a discriminatory way because of social pressure. So for example, it's 1950, and again, you have a cafe, and you yourself don't have anything against people of color, but you are living in the South, and you know that if you serve people of color, you will lose all of your white patrons, and then there will be a rock tied to a note tied to a rock and thrown through your window, warning you to stop socializing and serving and treating as equal people of color. And if you don't stop, then you're very likely to have your business destroyed, vandalized or a fire or something like that. So the social pressure of the Jim Crow South kept many people engaging in discriminatory practices, even if they did not necessarily have an attitude of prejudice. Okay, now we measure prejudice using a scale that was developed by a sociologist by the name of Emory Bogardus. So in the 1920s, 1930s, he developed something called the social distance scale, okay? The social distance scale. And the idea behind it was to say, you know, how comfortable would you be if somebody of a different race or different social class or from a different ethnicity were to get close to you? How close can somebody get before you get very uncomfortable? So there were like 7 levels, okay, 7 levels. So if you say, let's say it's a Chinese family. Do you think that, oh, you know what? Let me not use a Chinese family. Let me use a person who practices Islam, because this is very much part of our political climate right here. Now again, this scale was developed in the 20s and 30s, okay? And the most prejudice level is when you say, I'd exclude these people from my country. That's level 7. I'd exclude these people from my country. Interesting. Where have we heard that recently? Okay, the second level, which is number 6, is, well, I'd let them visit the country, but they can't stay. Okay, that's level 6. Level 5 says, well, I think it's okay for people from this group, so let's just say Muslims. I think it's okay for Muslims to come into the country and stay, and even to become citizens. I think that'd be okay, okay? Or you say, no, I don't even think they should be able to come in. If you don't think they should even be able to come in, that's a 7, okay? If you think, well, yeah, they can come in and they can be citizens, but I don't know that I want them, you know, working on my job. I don't think I want any Muslims working with me on my job. Okay, so then you would get a 5, because that's as far as you would go, citizens. Because number 4 is you would be okay with a person from this particular category working at your job, being a coworker. Okay, that's number 4. And then number 3 says, well, how comfortable would you be if the person was a neighbor? Okay, so they lived on your street. And you might be like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, okay, yeah, they can work at my job, but I don't want them living on my street. That's just too close to home. Okay. Or if you say, no, you know, fine, live on my street. And then the next question, this is number 2. Well, how comfortable would you be if these Muslims were able to get into your social circle, your club, and would you be open to becoming good chums, is the term that Bogardus used. How about would you make them a good chum, a good friend? And so if you say, yeah, we can be chums, we can be real chummy, okay, then that would be a 2. And then the closest one is, all right, how comfortable would you be if this person marries into your family? So maybe they marry your daughter, or maybe they marry you, okay? Because marriage now says we are one family, okay? We are all together in this. And so what we have seen over time is that the prejudice is reducing, and that more and more people are saying, oh, no, it's okay for people to come into the country, to become citizens. I'm still not quite comfortable with people marrying into the family, because as I said, 90% of people are still marrying within their own racial or ethnic group, okay? So, but you know, yeah, they can be citizens and they can live on my street, but I don't know if I'd be good friends, okay? So if most people are saying, yeah, you know, living on my street is okay, that puts it at a 3. But those that say, no, I don't even want them in the country, that's a 7. So I think it's going to be interesting as sociologists begin to do more research on attitudes of prejudice post-election, and to see if there is more, if prejudice has started to increase. I mean, we talk about it and we say that yes, we hear it in the discourse, but we don't have any scientific evidence yet to back it up. So it will be very interesting those that do research, and they might even use Bogardus' scale. That would be something, wouldn't it? Okay, now we often think of prejudice as something that other groups experience towards another group. But prejudice can be between groups, and it can be within. You know, sometimes you might find, I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but unfortunately I have, that sometimes the people that treat you the worst are members of your own racial or ethnic group, or religious group maybe even. So that's that prejudice within. Now when people hate members of their own category, it is referred to as internalized oppression. Internalized oppression. So that's the general term. So we can say, specifically, we can say internalized racism if you are a member of a racial category and you don't like members of that racial category. Or internalized homophobia if you are a member of the LGBT community and you don't like other people who are members of the LGBT community. You are gay and you hate gay people, okay? And unfortunately, that is not uncommon. And unfortunately, the racial internalized racism is not uncommon. If you are a woman and you hate women, if you're a woman and you are campaigning against women's rights, then you have internalized sexism, okay? So we have, because we live in a culture that sends us messages in so many different ways, that to be a person that is a minority is to be somehow inferior. Okay, it is very, very hard not to internalize that message. I mean, you have to be deliberate, intentional, not to internalize that message, which is something we've been talking about in class. You know, the messages that children get, that dark is bad, or the messages that people get that their natural features are bad. So you see people with darker skin, you know, using bleaching creams, or people getting surgeries to make their noses, people of African descent getting surgeries to make their noses more narrow, or people of Asian descent getting surgeries to give themselves the double eyelid, that which is one of the most popular cosmetic surgery procedures in some Asian countries. And these are all things designed to make us look more like the dominant group, which, interestingly, and I pointed this out, especially since there is such an issue of color, you know, colorism, thinking that light is better. It's so wild how people of color, many, not all, are like, oh, you know, it's better to be light. But then the lightest people in the country go to tanning booths to get dark. It's like we're so confused racially in this country. But when we internalize the oppression, okay, when we internalize the oppression, it often results in misplaced aggression. So misplaced aggression is when you find yourself filled with an anger or a rage, and you cannot take that anger or rage out on the source of the anger or the rage. So you just take it out on an easy nearby target. It is hard to fight society. You can't really target society, you know. And so if you have experienced internalized oppression, let's say it's internalized homophobia, and maybe you are not out about your sexuality, and you are not able to accept this part of yourself, and you join in with others in the harassment and the physical attacks against other people who are gay or bisexual or transgendered. You join into attacks with them because you have internalized this hatred of your own classification. And then the ultimate misplaced aggression is when people don't target other people, but when they target themselves. And it's like, I cannot stand the fact that I am what I am. I can't stand the fact that I'm gay. I can't stand the fact that I am whatever, my racial group, whatever that is. And so the ultimate misplaced aggression is when you harm yourself. And that's the other thing. It doesn't have to result in suicide. Sometimes it can just result in harming behaviors. Cutting, headbanging. There are all kinds of self-harm behaviors that people engage in. It's very sad. It's very sad. And I just want to encourage you. Love yourself. Because you're beautifully and wonderfully made. That's why I call you all beautiful people. Because you are. We all are. And our beauty shines when we walk with confidence and we say, this is who I am, and I'm going to love me. And loving me means treating me well. And loving me means, being around other people who can affirm me and value me. And that I will also do the same for them. Find those people. And if you haven't found them, keep looking. And if you're having trouble, call on me. Like I told you before, I'll tell you that you're wonderfully and beautifully made, just like you are. Okay. All right. So, moving forward. So we've talked about prejudice, and we've talked about, internalizing the prejudice, and we talked about misplacing that anger and those negative feelings and colorism. Now let's talk about another ism, and that would be racism. Racism. And this is the belief that one race is superior to all others, okay? You say, oh, well, I believe that my race is the superior race. Well, that's a racist attitude, okay? And, it's closely linked to ethnocentrism, which is one of our terms from earlier, where people tend to assume that their culture and way of life are the norm or are superior to all others, okay? So, yeah, the way we do it, that's the right way to do it. Everybody else, y'all need to get in line with us. Okay, that's ethnocentrism. Now, we talked about prejudice, but now let's move to talk about what racism and ethnocentrism can lead to. These can lead to hate crimes. Not always, but they can lead to hate crimes. And these are those offenses that we commit against others based on our bias. Maybe we have a bias against their race, or their religion, or their ethnicity, or their sexual orientation, or their sex, their age, anything. Okay, any of those subordinate categories. If we have a negative, hateful attitude, and we act on that attitude, and we commit a hate crime, maybe we vandalize, or we deface a mosque or a temple, okay? Or maybe we attack somebody just because of their race. And the thing is, again, race is such a social construct. And it might be, well, what was the race of the person you attacked? I don't know what they were. I just know they weren't what I am. So I decided I wasn't going to like them and I was going to attack them. Okay? And that's about how much sense it makes. Really, it does. Now, most hate crimes are based on race because that is the most obvious. I mean, religion, some people wear religious garb, some people don't. Okay? Sexual orientation, maybe if you see the person walking with their spouse or their partner and they're holding hands, then you'll have a sense. But, otherwise you might not know, okay? You might not know. So it's like, the one thing that I can know, every time I see you, well, you don't have to be wearing something because you're wearing your skin. You're wearing your features, okay? So I know that you are, again, you're not in my group. The person may be like, ooh, hallelujah, I don't want to be. Because you have a special group all your own, the hateful group. Okay. Now let's talk about ways that prejudice can be reduced. And one theory that talks about how prejudice is reduced is the contact hypothesis. Well, I guess it's a hypothesis more so than a theory. The contact hypothesis says that when people of different races but equal status work towards a common goal, prejudice can be reduced. Okay, so it's people, different races, but equal status, and third, common goal. You have to have all three of those factors in place. And if you have all three of those factors, then prejudice can be reduced. Now, they saw this during World War II when they integrated some of the different groups, some of the different platoons, if you will. So, you know, we had soldiers, African American soldiers, European American soldiers, all the same rank as soldiers, okay, fighting the common enemy. So they have a common goal to get through this skirmish, whatever it is, or this battle, alive, okay, and they had to work together towards that common goal. Then prejudice was reduced. So there you are out on the battlefield. It's chaotic. It's crazy. There's you know, terrible things happening everywhere. People are dying left and right all around you. And your leg, you step on a mine, your leg, you know, is blown. All right? Now you're down on the ground. What are you going to say when, let's say you're European American, African American man comes to pick you up? Are you going to say, "Stop, I'm waiting for a white man to pick me up"? No. Or if you're African American and you fell down, "Stop, I'm waiting for a brother to come along." No, you're not going to say that. You're going to say, "Help." You don't care. You're not going to care. And so you had African Americans saving European Americans, and European Americans saving African Americans. And at the end of the day, they realized they were just men. They were just men, and they were able to see each other as men because their survival depended on it. And it's when you get into situations of survival, sometimes what's really important becomes very clear. Now, a TV show that talked about this same kind of principle was Remember the Titans. Do you remember that movie? Those of you that saw it, it starred Denzel Washington, and it was two football teams that had come together. And it was European American players and African American players. And initially, they were not cooperating. They were not working towards the common goal of trying to win. But then when they decided, okay, we are losing, and we know we have skilled players, so we have got to put our skills together, stop fighting against each other. And then they went on to become champions. So it's a very good story. If you get a chance to watch it, you might enjoy it. Now, here's the thing to keep in mind. It's not just people of different races having contact. Because people of different races have always had contact. But if you don't have equal status, if one is subordinate to the other. So for example, in the South, we had African Americans had very intimate contact with European Americans. I mean, if you're cleaning someone's house, you are very much aware of everything that's going on in their life. You're in their house, you're cooking their food, you're washing their laundry. That is very close contact. But it didn't reduce prejudice because it wasn't equal status. In the Southwest, same thing. We had many women working as domestics in the homes of women of the dominant group, and it did not reduce prejudice because it wasn't equal status. So the status has to start as equal, common goal, reduced prejudice. The interesting thing about prejudice is that no one's born prejudiced, right? It's like you learn it. And you can tell this by watching kids, because kids only have one criterion, and that is, are you fun? Because if you're fun, they will make you a friend. They don't care how old you are, they don't care how you look, they certainly don't care the color of your skin. The only thing they want to know is, are you fun? If you're fun, then they want to be with you. It's only as their parents tell them, "Oh, Johnny, come here. Don't play with that little girl." "Why not? She's my best friend." "Oh, no, she can't be your best friend. They're not like us." "What do you mean, Mommy? Because they're fun?" No. Because they're different, you know. And so, there you have it. Children learn to be prejudiced. Now, the thing is, even though we get socialized to have certain attitudes, we can change. We can change because we can broaden our minds. We can take a sociology class. We can learn different things that will help us to see that some of the things we've been taught are not accurate. And so even though we have learned prejudice, we can unlearn it. We can learn new ways. But that requires resocialization. And we already know that resocialization is, it's more complicated. So, you know, we need to take a lesson from the children, be like they are, and just love people regardless, as long as they're fun. Okay, now prejudice, as we said, prejudice is an attitude, but discrimination is a behavior. So we're going to take a look at two kinds of discrimination. We're going to look at individual discrimination and institutional. So individual discrimination is where you have individuals or small groups deciding that they are going to treat another group or person wrong. They're going to exclude them. They're going to reject them. They're going to somehow not allow them to enjoy all the same rights and privileges therein. So they're going to treat them differently. That's to discriminate on an individual basis. But then we also have institutional discrimination. Now, institutional discrimination is tricky because institutional discrimination is more covert. Okay, covert is like covered. It's hard to notice. Okay, and so on the surface, it may be that there's a policy and it looks like it's fair, but it actually systematically applies to one group. So, for example, San Francisco used to have an ordinance, okay, in the 1800s that men could not wear their hair past their shoulders. Okay, so they had to keep their hair cut short. Now, this was not an issue for European American men, because they kept their hair short. This was an issue for Chinese men, because even though they might have their whole head shaved, they might have one long braid, okay, that they called a queue. And you did not cut this braid. This was very, very symbolic of a connection to your culture, to your past, to your family. So you did not cut the braid. So what was happening is that here's a policy. It looks like it applies evenly to everybody. Men cannot wear their hair long. But if the only men who are being fined are Asian men, in particular Chinese men, then this is an example of institutional discrimination, because it's a law that systematically targets a particular group, even though on the surface it looks fair.